Well, hello, everybody, and welcome for joining us for the Pixel Classroom podcast today on our live stream here. I like to welcome everybody to the podcast. Remember, if you're thinking of liking and subscribe, go ahead and like and subscribe to the channel. You can also join our Patreon page there at the patreon.com/, the Pixel Classroom. You can find that right in our show notes. Well, our guest today is an amazing educator. They've been everywhere, as we were talking just before the show. So they're English language learner, educator, international author, engaging educational speaker out of Philadelphia. Go PA. And has worked, like I said, grades K through 12 in the last 25 years of public education. And she is the thing. She has written the book Take Me Home, which was published by Austin Macauley in July of 2021. And it's based off the true story of 11 of her former ELL students and firsthand accounts and everything. We'll be talking about that. She's also was one of the Impact Influencers Volume 3s for 100 nonsensical things all school leaders should stop doing. As we know, I was in Educators 100 Things That They Should Stop Doing. So I am going to welcome the one and only Andrea Bitner here to the Pixel Classroom podcast. And there we are. Holy cow. How you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing well. How are you?
Oh, not too bad. Had another little area here and like I said, a little stuff beforehand, but here we are. It's a nice little night here. It's a wonderful Tuesday, and I'm just ready to do the show here, Andrea, and let you talk here.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here and everything else. So, Andrea, like I said, I give you an introduction there. Why don't you tell everybody else here on the audio and the couple people that are joining us here on the live stream today all about your career and everything else, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So, like you mentioned, I'm in my 25th year of teaching in public education. I didn't start out as an English language learner teacher. I actually started out as a high school English teacher. I was hired over the weekend, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, right out of Westchester University. And when I first started teaching, I was given what I lovingly called the most at-risk students in the building. And I was giving freshman students at the high school who hated school. And I remember going home every night and just crying. And I'm thinking, what am I doing wrong? Why can't I reach them? This is my first year. And I was so excited. And I quickly learned that the reason they hated school so much was because they couldn't read. And so that really, really baffled me in terms of tools in my toolbox. And I felt unequipped. So I went back to school as I was teaching, and I got a master's in reading, and I became a reading specialist. And so I worked as a reading specialist for Title I with grades 1 through 8. And in addition to that, I worked as a reading specialist at the middle school level in grades 6 through 8. And so at that time is when I started to work with English language learners. And I started to receive them in my groups. And I started to get more curious about that and feeling like, oh, I really want to start to get more tools to be effective working with our, when in Pennsylvania, we call them ELLs, English learners.
Right.
And so I went back to school again, and I got my certifications in learning in English learners, and I've been working in this field ever since. And so that's kind of how I arrived where I am today.
And it's very interesting, as you said right there, in Title I school. I know I went to Title I school here. I worked in Title I long time ago, once upon a time. So it's very interesting working. Something that's really a thing. What is something I've noticed this too is a lot of Title I schools, we do tend to have an ELL. I mean, I've been in several ones. I've seen raising ELLs and everything else in title, regular public, and even charter schools. I was in charter schools for 2 years as well too. Well, what do you think works well differently here? We're having the ELLs in the Title I school, because I mean, it is, some people say statistically, it's like, wow, there's always a lot of L's in Title I schools. I'm like, well, it's not true, but at the same time, you're right. There is a larger percentage. How do we relate to that in that here? I know I've had to change a whole lot in this past last 6 months. I've been at my current school with English language learners. Like, man, you said yourself, a lot of the students couldn't read. There was a lot of language barriers with mine. So,
Sure.
it's like, how would that, how does that, kind of flow into everything?
I think that the most important thing to remember about English language learners is that there is no one size fits all approach to service them. And so, we have, in my district, for example, we have 31 different languages represented. And really what I like to say is that the best indicator of how well a student will acquire a second language is how strong they are in their first. Now, in your primary grades, it's listening and speaking, right? If you have an L who's born here, which most days now, most English learners across the country are, then they've always been educated in English speaking schools.
Right.
Ever since, but their first experience with school could be kindergarten if they've never gone to pre-K. I'm working with kindergarten this year, and I have some students who have been in that situation. Then I have students who went to private boarding schools in different countries, and they come in speaking 3 and 4 languages, and they may or may not qualify with reading, writing, listening, and speaking for title services. So really what it comes down to is If they are illiterate in their first language, if they are coming from another country, then how strong are they in it? Because that's going to help us dictate how well they'll acquire their second. But if they're coming from a country where they've never been to school, or they had limited schooling, or a trauma situation, or a war, or a refugee status, or interrupted education, now you have to program for them very differently. And in my experience, those are often the students who need the title support because they're coming in with either lack of exposure because they were born here, never been to pre-K, and now need support, or they're coming from a situation where their schooling was interrupted.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point. I mean, a lot of the teachers I work with here, we have a couple of our teachers for that who are from Honduras, Chile, Spain. I have one, like I said, who is from Mexico, and like I said, I have one person who's from Puerto Rico. So they've definitely worked with the hands onto it. And it's very interesting how they've been able to relate to these various students who have come from that. Maybe they were in here and they were born and everything, but really they didn't have much experience until post kindergarten. I had a couple students that really didn't know anything till third grade. And then here we are 4 years later, they're in seventh grade. And, we have a lot of language barriers. So we work with a lot of the, ELL teachers to work with that, to handle it. Because despite that, they were not brought into that kind of a language at an earlier age versus a later age.
Sure. I mean, those foundational skills are so important. And when you have students coming in who still need the foundational skills at the middle level, at the high school level, that's when the EL teachers' collaboration with the content teachers, with the specialists in the building are so essential to filling in those gaps, right? So that you can give them what they need to be successful in and out of all their classes.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. I know you talk a little bit about some of your early stories because, like I said, I was able to read over the cliff notes here really quick of "Take Me Home," which I know is based off a lot of your stories from students too. And I was involved in a couple of things with learning, coffee and learning books, which were a lot of real stories. But for that one, "Take Me Home," how did that actually come about based off these stories you just introduced about a lot of the students? Like I said, you're working with kindergartens here. This was much more older students that were done with "Take
It
Me Home."
was.
How did their stories lead to the creation of this book?
Yes. So, about over a decade ago, I worked at the high school level with English language learners. And at the time, I had about 40 different students with about 25 different languages. And they came from all walks of life. I had kids that had crossed the border. I had kids that were born here. I had kids who had waited 10 years for a visa and came after their parents. I had kids that waited 10 years for a visa and came before their parents. I had adopted students. I had exchange students. We had everybody. And so, although they all came in with different proficiency levels and different life experiences, I had this classroom banner at the time that greeted them. And that classroom banner said, "Education is opportunity, education is freedom. What's your plan?" Because we knew that when they were with us in our program, whether we had them for 4 years in high school or less, depending on when they came in, we only had a limited amount of time for a free education before they had to pay for it to go out into the world and acquire skills to become a young bilingual. And so at that time, we would have this famous t shirt day where I would invite the alumni who were now out living in the world to come back. And
Hmm.
they would bring our current seniors a t shirt. And that t shirt would say wherever they were headed next, whether it was college, community college, university, training, workforce, it didn't matter. They were there to share with them the asset that they had now that they were young bilinguals heading into the world. And they were there to congratulate them on achieving this chapter of their life's plan. And they would sign this banner to commemorate that day. And at the time, I worked with one particular family, the Lopez family, and I worked with all 7 of their children. And it was all boys and one girl. And they happened to be from El Salvador. And I've traveled to El Salvador myself a few times to do some work with schools down there. And so over the years, I got to know this family. It was from Sergio all the way down to Nancy, the youngest and only female. And they all went through this program and this mentality and successfully graduated. And about a year after I was done working with that family, I was teaching one day and there were a bunch of helicopters outside. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of helicopters outside today. I wonder what's going on. And about an hour after that, my principal came down to get me to let me know that one of my students had been hit by the train. And
Wow.
unfortunately, that student was Nancy. And unfortunately, she passed away that day. She had put on a pair of headphones and she had made a choice to walk along the inside of the tracks. And as she was walking, she was clipped from behind by the acela. And so it was at that time that our community and our school and our program and these awesome kids were thrown into a huge sense of trauma. And one of the most challenging parts of that day was that mom and dad were still learning English themselves. And so when they got the call that something had happened to Nancy, there was no one on the local force who spoke Spanish. And so they kind of knew that something was wrong, and they kind of knew that something had happened to one of the kids, but they didn't know which one it was. And so for hours, they were up at the courts, calling the schools, trying to figure out what had happened to their daughter. And so in the coming weeks, we worked with immigration to get her brother to be able to come back and bury his sister, which he was denied. We worked with the local school, the community, the church that mom and dad were involved with to really start to help them navigate the language process, the funeral process, burying their daughter. And one of my jobs at the funeral was to speak. And so at the time, I wrote this short poem and I called it Take Me Home. And it was an homage to Nancy's crossing into the US. And I let that sit on my desk and I went on to teach these amazing kids for months. And one day I saw that poem sitting there and I was like, you know what? Maybe something about this story could be helpful to someone. So I sent that poem out on a whim. And a couple months later, a publisher gets back to me and they say, hey, Andrea, we really like your poem, but we don't want you to write a poem. We want you to write a book. And we're going to give you 6 months to do it. And if you come back with something we like, we'll take you on and publish. And I started to think to myself, well, I don't just want to tell her story. I want to tell all their stories because they're so different. And a lot of times my students were coming into the classroom with frustration, saying things like, Miss B, everybody here thinks I'm from Mexico. I'm not from Mexico. I'm from Ecuador. I'm from Colombia. I'm from South America. I'm from Brazil. Or other kids would come in and saying things like, everybody in this school keeps asking me if I lived with lions in Africa. I never lived with lions. I went to a private boarding school in the city. Where other kids will come in and say, I'm dressing in a certain way to represent my religion and nobody seems to understand it, Miss B. And so with that thought in mind, I really wanted to start to try and change the narrative in a positive light. And so I went back and I found 11 of my former alumni who are now in their late 20s, early 30s. And I asked them about their school experiences. And from those conversations, which was about 6 months of conversation, we created Take Me Home, the true story of 11 of my students who tell what it was like to really become bilingual in America. And we weave Nancy's story through it. And every chapter is told through the first person, through their eyes. We hit almost every continent. We hit almost every experience we could think of. And we repeat the story in Spanish within the same book. So we're really proud of it. It was released in 2021. It's been read around the world by high school students, middle school students, school leaders, teachers, PLCs, future teachers, and it's creating a lot of great reflection and conversation.
It's an incredible book. Like I said, just hearing about the stories and everything. I have to say it's on my wish list right now to get
Thank
a
you.
couple of them. Really, I do want to read it. And it is. It's just an incredible story here. And I hate to say it, and too, like hearing the story about what happened to Nancy. That was always my greatest fear. When people saw me always running with my dog or bike ride, they always say, Ryan, why don't you wear headphones? And I said, one of the things was when I was younger, I had a friend of mine who had his Walkman on. This is like middle school age myself, so we're going back 30 years. And he wasn't paying attention and he walked into a car that was backing up. He had just his headphones on. We talk about phones and watches and what he had his Walkman on. He was playing his music full blast. I think he was listening to some AC/DC. He walked right into a car that was backing up. Luckily he just broke his leg and, he was, a couple months later, we stopped doing it. But after that, he didn't do it. And a lot of us, we stopped doing that. We would have Walkmans too if we were walking outside or riding our bikes. I stopped doing it. I stopped doing it as a result. And then I went back years later when I was working out at the Y, and then I ran into a person. I didn't even hear them coming. They were really large, and I ran into. After that, I never listen to music when I work out. I really do not, because I found out I have to. And now we have noise canceling. The headphones I'm wearing right now here for the recording this podcast, these are noise cancel. I can hear out of them, but if I pull it here, I hear more versus two. So that's always been my thing about that, as a worry. And they hear this story. It's just like, it kind of hit me in that aspect.
Sure.
I do know what that's like, where somebody, is just going about their day. They're doing something they haven't done 100 pounds a day. And then that life just changed, but it doesn't just change for them. It changes for tons of people, as you said too, about what happened here with Nancy and what happened with her and her passing away after that accident. So it hits home. It hits home just hearing the story itself. So it does, no pun intended, would take me home and hit me home.
Sure.
But it's a pretty amazing story. I've heard good things about it too. So like I said, I'm hoping hopefully reading here in 2025. It's on my book list. Hopefully we'll see. Hey, if I get it, like I said, if it might be a gift, Christmas present. We don't know. But
Thank you. We would love that.
Here. Yes, hopefully it will. So hey, it's 14 days as they were recording this in the audio and video. So on that, and if my computer wants to behave itself, that's why I was doing. If you saw me sometimes, like I'm looking here, it's people on the audio, it's like you don't know how many tabs I have open and how slow my computer goes here. So on that one, despite that one thing, and continuing of that about your other book, which is The Impact of Influence here. So what happened on this one? So this one's a little different. Like I said, it's one thing here. You did this with Chip Baker. So what is the story about the impact of influence here? About it's, and if people who can't, see the audio, the visual of this, is the impact of ladies using their influence to create a life of impact influence. This is volume 3 too. So it's like, what is the story? And first of all, there's 2 other volumes. I didn't know this.
Yes. So tremendous gentleman out there named Chip Baker. He is based out of Texas. We met years ago when he and Tammy Matheny, who's from the John Gordon Company, would run this amazing group called the Virtual Authors Tour. And we met way back then when I was actually writing Take Me Home. I hadn't even published it or had it published yet. So Chip and I have kept contact over the years, and he does tremendous work with what you're seeing, which is called the Impact of Influence series. And so there were a few volumes, 1 and 2, before this third one, which I was asked to be a part of. And the special thing about this third volume of it is that it's all women. And they are all women from around the country with a variety of life experiences who got an opportunity to write about someone or something that changed the trajectory of their path for them. And so it's full of true stories. It's full of advice. It's full of positivity. It's full of lessons learned. And Chip continued even after this volume. There are additional volumes that he has created. And he goes out and he shares this work with people around the country, in addition to going to talk to kids. He does tremendous work with teachers and tremendous work with kids and influencing them about the power of mentorship.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. It's funny today, like our homeroom, as we call it, Hive, since we're the Hornets. One thing we talked about is like, what is the influence and mentorship and apprenticeship for students? And we're, like I said, talking about this at a younger age, at 6th through 8th grade, about what that looks like post, secondary, but also how the mentorships do help. We have a lot of students that are in mentorships now between different robotics clubs, chess club, and everything, but also working for the mentorships and how that impacts. And most of our advisors are women, so it's wonderful to actually see, this too. Like, robotics is my coworker, Sue Isles, who's doing this, and she's got an amazing STEM class, and she does it, and she's right now listening to me like, stop kissing my butt, Ryan. but no, it's amazing hearing about the impact of influence and hearing about the mentorships and everything. I think it's really a thing. A lot of my mentors were all women. My instructional coach was a woman, and my my graduation chair was a woman. It was actually two other women too. So it's amazing how impactful that has been about keeping that and so forth. So it's kind of great to see that there's not only that, but there's 3 other volumes about that, about why it's important for the mentorshipping.
It really is. Focusing on the lens of just, all kids in general. I always say, if kids can see it, they can be it. And it's important for us to give them access to quote unquote seeing as many opportunities out there as possible. So whether that be connecting with your local organizations, your national organizations, your regional organizations, connecting them with other kids, which is why I would have the alumni come back every year for that mentorship piece, to show our seniors, hey, this is what's waiting for you. Hey, and our underclassmen would attend that day to learn, hey, this is why it's worth it. This is why you need to do well in school. This is why you need to be ready for the workforce. And just, I could tell them all day long those things. But when they see other young people who are out there doing it just a few years ahead of them, I feel that the impact can be even bigger.
And I think that's always is we always talk about us, and they think, oh yeah, sure, you're just saying that because you're saying that the teacher, versus you actually have other people to do it. I know years ago I was reading a story about a teacher, and he was talking about a type of autism, and eventually one of the students said, I've been dealing with it all my life. I think that would make more sense if I did it. But then they're like, okay, you teach the class. Like, what do you mean teach the class? Like, well, you just said you were the expert. I think I went, and the students actually learned more, and they were there in our 2 years before they graduated high school, but he kept re-inviting them back for this. And it was a psychology class, but it was very interesting. But he said, well, no, you're the expert. You've been dealing with this. I haven't. I've just read about this and dealt with students that have autism, but how is it you to live it versus me experience it as a teacher? Yes. And people, my son himself, he has ADHD and other sensory issues and so forth, but it's much different him telling the story versus me as a parent living with. The same thing with my wife, who has epilepsy. Her story, when she talks about it, is a whole different story versus me as an advocate, as well as a spouse who is living with somebody with that type of neurological disorder. So it's always better when it comes from them versus comes from you or me, who, like, yeah, we talk about, we have our experiences, but when they see more people in that area, it tends to be I should say more impactful, to use the word.
Sure. And when people are vulnerable enough to kind of share their true stories and their experiences, it really opens a door for young people to connect and to say, you know what, it's not so scary. If she did it or if he did it, I can do it too, which I think is awesome.
Right. And then speaking of doing impactful, so people can't see this in audio, but I'm on their website right now. We got one right here. She has a resource and she has the hot seat, which I've seen done. So how does the hot seat work in the classroom? This is a very interesting little lesson.
So I've been, I'm always reading myself, and I'm always, trying to make my lessons as engaging as possible with all kids all the time. And so hot seat is something I learned about years ago. It can be done with any grade, really. And what it is you put one person in a chair, right? If you're watching this on the screen, you'll see the black chairs. If you're not, you could use any chair. And then in front of that student, you're going to put 3 red chairs or 3 other chairs. So the job is that the person sitting in the chair will hold up an index card to their head. And then the students have to describe the term and get the person in the chair to say it in order to get the point. So you've got 2 groups going at the same time, or you could have them go back and forth. And every time they get it correct, they get a point. The team votes for who would be in the hot seat. They cannot switch it. And that's the way we play it. That key person is there for at least the first 5 minutes before they can. And it's a great way to review vocabulary. You could do it with math terms. You could do it with math problems. There's lots of different ways you could play this game, but anything you can quote unquote gamify for kids, they are all in. And so it's one way that I use for vocabulary review, for content area terms in the classroom, and we have a lot of fun with it.
I did this similar several years ago when I was at Jackson with some of the kids when I was doing my STEAM enrichment, when we were doing our robots and everything. So I'd have the kids like figure out the robotics terms like algorithm, loop, and repeat. So they'd have to, and like I said, I did this with older grades because, like I said, reading was what it was. I mean, I did some things with kindergartens. I actually did pictures, so they would hold up a picture,
exactly,
and the kid would have to describe it. And I'd have kindergartens come up with some really cool, would really come out with some really cool descriptions. Like, it makes you keep going. You're going like this, and you're going like this, and you never stop. And he was like, "Oh, it's a loop."
Yeah,
it was, but that's what I did. Is I would put the picture on. I would print out the card and I would put it on thing, and the kids would. Well, we did similar to Heads Up too, like I said when we did for our PE team. But that's what I would do, and they would do it that way. So it was really cool because, and it was funny. It's like, oh, this. They were like, I said, oh, I thought it was like Heads Up or picture. They're like, Dr. Reed, they're like, Ryan, this is called hot seat. I was like, oh, hot seat. I never heard the term before, but I knew what it was, and that was one thing. And what's so nice about the website too, if I click on that link right there, it takes you to a nice Google Docs too, so you can go over it as well too. I used to do To Tell the Truth based off the old TV shows. So I would give a set of cards to the 3 students, and they would have to figure out who is it really doing the activity. So I had one where we were doing job interviews, and like they're up for a job, so then they only could ask the questions. We'd have the students go around the room with these 3 students, and they have to figure out which one of these is going to the job interview. And then they would have to guess where they would answer the questions. Like, well, I have my resume. Like, do you have a resume? Like, yeah, blah, blah, blah. And then things. So that, but they would know it because we'd gone over these lessons. So a lot of the students actually, could answer these questions. They would have to get them on a really stumped one.
Yeah.
Where they couldn't answer. It wasn't on the note card, or as they said, they couldn't improvise it too. And that's usually how they figured it out. But I would do it after about a week or 2 after we did a lesson. So then the 3 people in the Tell the Truth hot seats could really, lie about it, versus one. I was like, you're telling the truth. There's your cards. The other one's like, if you get these set of lies, here's what you say. I mean, I couldn't guess all the questions they would say, but it worked really well for to tell the truth, which was its own version of hot seat. So it does really nice.
And there's a great resource out there right now I've been reading. And, even though I'm like in year 25, like I'm still always looking to sharpen my tools, right? So there is a book by Jonathan Alsheimer called School of Engagement.
Oh, and I think I've seen that one too.
Yeah. Jonathan has written it. I think it released this year, but all practical, really high impact, high interest engagement activities that you can infuse into any lesson. And so I've been trying out some of those this year as well.
And believe it or not, for our visuals, I actually just found it here. That's what happens when you can type 80 words a minute. And there it is, School of Engagement. I like that.
45 activities.
I like that cover. It just works really cool. Yeah, 45 activities in Night City. Because people know I still do. I haven't bought as many books for other reasons here. But when I always get a new book, I always put it in some fact. I had Annick Rauch on here a couple weeks ago, and I was telling her there was 2 activities, and her one with phenomenal, which I said I had ended up putting in effect about a week after I read the book. And she's like, oh, that's a great way to do that. So same thing with me, even a lot of educators is I'm always relearning things. There's activities, like I said, hot seat. Like I said, I was doing hot seat a couple years ago before they were called hot seat. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that was what it was called. And like same thing with here. And I'm pretty sure Jonathan's got a couple. I know he talks about a couple things like similar to headbands, which I got from wild cards from the Kings and everything else too, which I actually had my nieces had old headbands games that they did, so I did it, and I would use that to redo vocabulary for my freshmen for digital literacy, and they really got into that game really fast about describing like Chrome keyboard shortcut, Canva, so forth, and they would have to do the description, and it worked really well.
Very cool.
Wow. I mean, yeah, there's some good stuff. See, that's another reason why Andrea, she just has that wonderful resource. Remember, you like I said, you should be following her right now. You can do her right there at, Andrea Bitner Books right there. I feel like I'm doing a promotion for a bookstore right there. It's like Andrea Bitner Books. You can get them there on your local stores now. Bring your rewards card, and maybe you can get a free coffee every 10 weeks,
Thank you.
So, and another thing too is like you, Andrea, you're part of the Teach Better Network. So, how did you get involved with the Teach Better Network, and what do you do? I mean, I just got into the PD, and I will pop up there, and I'll do the podcasts and everything, and I've been very happy with the description. But for your stuff, how do you work with the Teach Better team?
So, why I got involved with the Teach Better team was about 4 years ago when Take Me Home released. I started to get phone calls from schools. And they would say, hey, our educators read your book, or our high school students read your book, our middle school students read your book. Would you come out and talk to our teachers? And I was like, well, sure. And so here I was, I still teach, like teaching, and starting to go into schools, conferences, universities around the country and teach them how to better reach, teach, and, confidently connect with their English language learners and families. And so from those invitations, I started to create support sessions that I could facilitate for educators. And so I knew a lot about teaching, right? That's the easy part, right? I always feel it's been very easy for me to do that. But I didn't know anything about the business world. And so I had to start a way to learn to marry the two, because I wasn't sure how to navigate. Well, how do you go out and talk to schools in terms of how do you work with schools, and how do you reach out to let people know about the work you're doing, and how can I go out and better support teachers? Because I loved it. I absolutely still do it today. I still do it once or twice a month right now, in addition to teaching each day and traveling the country and helping teachers. And so the Teach Better team has this great group called edupreneurs. And they're all amazing people who are educators, and right? They are educators, and they've got some type of mission, some type of passion, some type of expertise that they wanted to use to make a bigger impact on educators, teachers, and kids across the country. And so I joined Edupreneurs. We meet once a week. There's about a dozen of us in the group on Thursday nights for an hour and a half, and we all learn. We have Jeff Gargis, who's awesome.
Oh yeah, I go around with Jeff. I'm gonna get him on here one of these days.
You got to. If you haven't checked out Teach Better, in Edupreneur specifically, that's what I'm a part of. They've got a phenomenal ambassador program. They've got courses you can take. Some are free, some are paid. It's just a great way to connect with teachers. And that's really the unexpected part of this journey that I've enjoyed the most through Teach Better, is meeting awesome people like you, Ryan, and other people across the country. Because guess what? Our challenges aren't that different. It doesn't matter what state I've been to, what small town, large town, urban city where I've met with teachers and helped them. Our challenges aren't that different. And so it's just great to quote unquote get out of your bubble and use social media, use Teach Better community, use other groups to, raise your own bar to continue to learn professionally and to feel supported by being able to connect with other educators just like you. So that's how I got involved with Teach Better, and I'm still involved with them today. I'm actually one of their ambassadors now as well.
I know, and congratulations on that sort of thing. I mean, I might be able to do that someday.
That'd be awesome. Yeah.
Well, I know, like I said, I kind of, like I said, I stick here, and like I said, I do my PD here, and I get together when I can too. I mean, podcasts are kind of on parts and discussions. I get more depending on the time of year. Like this time, as we're heading towards winter or holiday break for everybody too. It's like all of a sudden, it's like after December 21st, it's like, does Ryan not have a life when school is over? It's like all of a sudden magic. Like, he posted this at 10 o'clock at night. He posted this at 1 a.m. He responded to 6 people. It's like versus like the rest of the year is like, well, what are we doing Mondays? Okay, Ryan, I'm working on this. What was you're waiting for this. I need a pie. Oh, I want to be on your. Oh, well, that was an awesome episode. And then they're like, oh yeah, I hear from Ryan maybe every once a week. And so it's like I kind of do, but it's just timing kind of thing too. But like I said, I try to hand out the PDs and everything. Like I said, your work here, especially with the edupreneurs, with somebody who's a CTE teacher who is now working at a school which has an AVID program and everything, which is, if anybody knows, AVID is another type of CTE program. It's just meant for younger and for Title I as well as for other pieces. And there's training. It's amazing too, and it has its own system, which I've been relearning, I should say. I actually found out I was doing it years ago, and now it's like, oh, now you're on the AVID system. Like, I know, I guess you can't take the business teacher out of the. So it's like I don't go away. I just evolve.
Yeah.
So on that note too, Andrea, like, what do you have coming up here for, people here as we lead into the wrap up here? What do you got coming up for your future here? And what's 2025 looking for Andrea Bitner?
So it's been pretty exciting. I mean, I'm still teaching daily, working with students this year in grades K through 8. And in addition to that, once or twice a month, I've been going out to travel to support teachers. So I've been doing support sessions like, what do you ask when an English learner joins your class? Questions and solutions for all teachers. I do a session called Getting Content with Content, how to accommodate for ELs in the classroom. I've done sessions for collaboration between EL teachers and content teachers, which is huge. I've done systems for school leaders, the 4 pillars of an successful school that runs EL. And I've done another one called From Registration to Navigation for social workers, attendance teams, office teams, all of your frontline people that work with EL families a lot when they're calling and showing up and asking questions. And in addition to that, I've got some lineups set up to go talk to kids, high school kids. I do a presentation called Being Bilingual is a Gift, where we talk to them about the assets they have. So Take Me Home is the backbone of all of those presentations. And then there's real strategies teachers and educators and leaders can use and walk away with actionable items. And so I have presentations and support sessions set up each month for the rest of this year going into 2025. And I'm looking forward to doing some additional support sessions this summer, which is exciting. Personally, my daughter is graduating from high school. So Woo! That's an exciting time. We are waiting.
I got 4 more years for my son, and then he'll be.
Okay, we're there. We're waiting for schools any day now. We're waiting to hear from all of her schools. She'll know in the next 2 weeks from all of them. And then I have a daughter who's a sophomore who's right behind her. So lots of good things are going on for us.
Oh, it sounds like 2025 definitely has some really good thing here. I have much here. I usually do my wrap up report. Like, here's what the year up, and then here's what I come up here. But it's like, I think you got some more exciting. Mine is the fact that, like I said, my son is coming to the end of the middle school age. Like I said, turns 14 here in 2 weeks. And then, in about 5 months, he's off to high school. And
yeah,
I used to teach yet. So that's going to be very interesting for both of us here too. Talking, like say, oh, what teacher's like, well, this teacher, I take this teacher and I got to take this class, and so forth. I'm like, now you got to decide. Like, I can't do that much too either. So it's like, I gotta let him decide. And that's one thing that's very interesting as a parent. I know you just see with 2 daughters, with one graduating high school this year, one a sophomore who, as they say, getting the license in one hand, but you definitely have a different point where you're releasing them too, or when you need to know the step back too. And
the launch. I call it the launch. Yeah. You're getting ready to launch them. Yes.
I like that word, the launch. Here we go. Let's see here. Do I have any? No, I don't have anything on my sound attack here. So since I have nothing on the sound attack, we'll just do that. Yeah, there we go. I got nothing there. Got crickets there. I got everybody's like, you haven't done your horn in weeks ago. I was like, well, some people didn't like it. I thought I was being nice and decided not to do that. So it'll slowly come back in 2025, everybody. So if anybody's listening on the audio, yes, my sound effects will come back on that too. So yeah, and of course, where can they find you to follow you on your social medias there, Andrea?
Yes, reach out anytime. You can go to the website, AndreaBitnerBooks.com. You can find me on LinkedIn at Andrea Bitner, Instagram and Twitter at Andrea Bitner Books, or Andrea Bitner on Twitter, I should say, and Andrea Bitner Books on Insta. So the LinkedIn and Twitter are probably the easiest places, in addition to the website, where you can reach out anytime. I'm always here to support you in any way I can. I've done lots of brainstorming sessions with teachers just who are in places around the country that need ideas.
Well, I mean, like I said, it's been an absolutely incredible thing. I thank you so much for being on here. I mean, we were able to, talk and say, hey, let's do it. I said, here's the time. You're like, hey, let's do it. And, here we are doing this. So I really thank you here being on here on the Pixel Classroom podcast today, Andrea, and sharing your stories and everything else. And like I said, people, if you haven't check out our books, or as it's in the show notes here, if you're on the Patreon here, you'll get this episode a few days before it drops early here. So, definitely think of liking and subscribing to that as well for our tiers. And if you're looking for me, you can find me on LinkedIn, of course, or you can find me on Blue Sky at Ryan7Reed there. I'm all over the place. And I'm on Instagram if you want to see both my home life and my work life. You know, sometimes it's boring. Sometimes another Pokemon share. Come on, Ryan. Come on, stop it. My Christmas lights are up. Okay, you know. Andrea's like, so this is what he's like in person.
Great.
Well, everybody else, thank you for joining us today on the Plixo Classroom podcast, and we will talk to everybody later.
Thank you.
You're welcome.